Yeah, so we'll start in a moment. I think yeah, there are a few people who are yet to join. Yeah, so maybe let us start now. So in the last lecture, we had learned about the challenges in the digital design. So we had talked about the problem with interconnects, noise, crosstalk, reliability, power dissipation, then clock distribution networks, and time to market issue. Millions of gates are there in the design. So how to design with them. Then the use of high-level abstractions and the reuse and the portability of the IPs. So all these issues or challenges we talked about, and then we also talked about the scaling. Yeah, so these were the issues that we talked about in the last lecture. Now let us talk about the design matrix, right? So maybe let me make my screen full screen. So let us talk about these design matrix. So what are they? So when somebody says how you will evaluate the performance of a digital circuit, so there are similar types of circuits available. So which circuit would be better? So any circuit would be associated with, or any digital IC would be associated with uh, some metrics which are called design metrics. And these design metrics are, for example, cost, reliability. Okay, so reliability, that is circuit should perform properly in presence of noise. Right? Then scalability, the circuit should be scalable. Speed, that is speed depends on delay. Then operating frequency of microprocessor, in terms of speed for microprocessor, we say operating frequency of microprocessor, they decide the speed. Then power dissipation we had seen, and also energy to perform a function, so which is very important when we talk about these mobiles, right? So these are all the design metrics, okay? And these design metrics are for the digital integrated circuit, or any integrated circuit will be associated with some design metrics, and these would be some of the common design metrics, that is cost, reliability, scalability, speed, power dissipation, and energy to perform a function. So all these are design metrics. So we'll talk about these design metrics in detail. So for example, let us first of all talk about this cost, which is a design metric. So we understand that the cost of the digital IC should be as small as possible, and the cost depends on many factors. So those factors, let us try to find out what are those factors. So let us talk about this cost issue. Now the cost of an integrated circuit, it depends on two factors, right? So there are in fact the cost of this ICs, this is divided into two things. One is NRE, that is non-recurrent engineering cost, okay? And the other one is recurrent cost, right? So two costs are there. I mean, the cost is, overall cost is divided into two, that is non-recurrent engineering cost, which is also called fixed cost. Yeah? This is fixed, you cannot optimize it, you cannot change it, right? So whatever money is spent on this part, so that is fixed. And recurrent cost, these are variable costs, okay? So these can be variable, these are not fixed costs, and they depend on various factors, so we'll talk about them. So let us first discuss this fixed cost or non-recurrent engineering. So this non-recurrent engineering or fixed cost depends upon the design time and the design effort, okay? So what is the design time and how much effort is being put to design an IC, so that is normally fixed. And it also depends upon mask generations, right? right? So more is the mask generation. I mean, more is the number of masks required. That is more if the complex process is more complex. So obviously, number of masks will be more, right? So this cost depends on mask generation. So how many masks you are producing. Then it also depends on some one-time cost factors, and it is also independent of the sales volume and the number of products sold. So you cannot bring down this fixed cost by saying that okay, you're selling billions of the same products, or the sales volume is very high and the number of product is very high, number of products sold is very high. You cannot bring down this cost because this is fixed cost and it depends upon the mask generation, design time and design effort. Okay, so you cannot bring this down. Then recurrent cost or variable cost, so they depend upon a few factors. First is silicon processing, packaging and testing, right? So the cost is spent on the processing of silicon. So silicon processing involves, for example, first of all, you'll have to get the single crystalline silicon from the Czochralski process. Okay, so that will bear some cost, and then finally, when you have the silicon I0, you will have to then cut them into CD kind of wafers, wafer circular dish kind of wafers, and then you'll have to perform so many operations on that wafer. So all these things are called processing of the silicon. So they also involve some cost. And then finally you have, when you have your digital integrated circuit fabricated, so that fabricated chip you will package into some safe housing. Okay. So that also packaging also involves some money. And then you will perform some tests also. Before selling it to the customer, one has to perform tests on that digital IC also. Now depending upon how you are performing testing, that is what is the testing coverage. That is, if you are performing 100% testing, so obviously it will be very costly. Though 100% testing is not possible, but still, let's say you are performing large number of tests, more combinations of input you are testing, then the test cost will also grow up, right? So these are variables. So for example, testing, if you don't test the entire chip for entire all input combination, then the test cost will be smaller, right? If you perform more test, very stringent test, then test cost will go up. Similarly, what kind of packaging, the quality of packaging decides the cost. Then silicon processing, the quality of silicon that you're producing. So these costs are variable, yeah, depending upon how standard is your process or packaging or testing. Then this recurrent cost is also proportional to the product's volume. That is, how many chips you are producing, how many digital ICs you are producing. So the number of ICs produced, that is volume of products. So it depends on the volume of product. Greater the volume of the product is, lower will be this recurrent or variable cost. Then it also depends upon the chip area. It is proportional to the chip area also. So if the chip area is large, recurrent cost will be large. If the chip area is small, so this cost will also be small. So that means this is variable cost. Yes, all these things are variable. All these things, these are variable. So this cost, that is recurrent cost, is also a variable cost. Now we see that the fixed cost, that is the non-recurrent engineering cost, this is increasing. Okay? In fact, the non-recurrent cost is exploding. Okay? Because the mask cost is also increasing, because more number of masks are now involved, because the components are.
Sir,
Yeah, please.
sir, why this design cost is not comes into recurrent cost? Because design cost can be varied. If the design is complex, then it has high cost, and if design is simpler, then it will be of low cost.
Yeah, correct. So it depends upon which process technology we are using. I mean, which, if you talk about today's world, that is, let's say 2020, right? So complexity is at some level, a very high level. If you go back to 2000 or maybe 98, the complexity was very less, right? So the design effort and design type was more or less similar in 2000 for any chip, because complexity was not at that level. But if you talk about the newer process technology, working people who are working on newer process technology, so obviously the complexity level is very high, right? So it depends upon the complexity level. So obviously, if somebody was working 10 years back, so one can say that design effort or design time cost can be smaller, right? So it can be variable if we bring into this picture time into this picture. From 2000 to 2020, it is obviously variable, no doubt. Yeah? So it depends upon the complexity. So NRE is fixed. I say I am paying money to the same designer to design the chip at for the advanced technology for a very complex circuit. Right? So let's say that for a particular year it can be fixed. But yes, if you bring in a time scale that is from 2000 to 2020, one can say that it is variable cost. But for a particular year, one can say that since the complexity level is same, so design effort and design time would also be same. So it is fixed. So that's why when we talk about only just one time or 1 year, we can say that it is fixed. Otherwise, obviously, it can be variable. Right? It can be variable otherwise, but when we bring into the picture this thing time, then we can say that it is variable. That is from 2000 to 2020, complexity level also has changed. So design time and design effort can be variable, but for a fixed year, that is, let us say 2020, complexity level is not different, it is same. It is same for Intel, who is producing the same microprocessor, or maybe AMD, who is trying to produce the same microprocessor with same features. So design time and effort may be a fixed cost, right? So this is exploding because the mass cost is also increasing. So in fact, if you look at this picture, so from 0.25 micron process to 0.05 micron process, right? That is 250 nanometers to 50 nanometers. We see that the non-recurrent engineering cost is increasing because the mass cost is also increasing here. Right? So mass cost is going up here because the complexity is increasing. Yeah, chip complexity is increasing. So the mask cost is also increasing. So because of increase in mass cost, this NRE cost, that is non-recurrent engineering cost, is also going up. Okay. Then now let us talk about our wafers, right? So how do they look like? So wafer is actually a circular disk. For example, this, right? So this is called a silicon wafer. Right? It's circular only. The process defines its shape. It cannot be rectangular. It cannot be circular. Sorry, it cannot be square or it cannot be triangular. The process itself defines its shape. It will always be a circular kind of disk like this, because the process by which it is produced, defines its shape, and that process is Czochralski process. So in a Czochralski process, you have a molten silicon in some crucible, right? So in some, crucible, you'll have a molten silicon, and then from this molten silicon, you, try to pull up single crystal silicon. Yeah. So maybe let's say this is my handle by which I am pulling up the single crystal silicon from this molten silicon, and while pulling this up, this single crystal silicon up, this is also rotated at a very high speed. So depending upon its speed, you will find the diameter. Right? So the diameter of this wafer depends upon the speed of the rotation. Okay, while the single crystal silicon is being pulled up from this molten silicon crucible. So yeah, this is pulled up, and at the same time, it is also rotated, right? So pulling and rotated, right? So it is pulled up, molten from the crucible which has molten silicon. We pull up a single crystal silicon. So I'm trying to pull up a single crystal of silicon. Okay, so this is Czochralski process. Maybe we'll talk about this later. So single crystal silicon is being pulled. Okay, it is pulled, and while pulling, it is also rotated. So depending upon the speed of rotation, you will find, so depending upon the speed of rotation, let me erase this. So depending upon the speed of rotation, you will find that the diameter also depends on the speed of rotation. So that is why this disc is always circular. It is never of any other shape. Okay. Now once you obtain, once you do this, okay, so you will obtain a kind of cylinder, right? So you will find a silicon cylinder, right? So this is my crystalline silicon cylinder obtained, because you are pulling the single crystal silicon and you are rotating it, yeah, hot silicon, and then you're rotating it. So when it comes in here, it becomes cooled down and it takes a form of cylinder, and then from this cylinder you slice this cylinder into disc, circular disc of this kind. So circular disc can be produced by this method. Now these rectangular blocks which you are seeing here, for example this rectangular block, or maybe this rectangular block, so all these small rectangular blocks are called single dies. Yeah. So this circular disc is the wafer. Yeah, this circular disc, entire disc is called a silicon wafer, and these rectangular blocks are called single dies. Now the wafer size, so this is going up to 12 inches. That is somewhere around 30 centimeters. So earlier the wafer size was smaller, but now the wafer size has increased up to 12 centimeter, 12 inches. In fact, maybe I'll have some slides for the, yeah. So earlier the wafer size, it is varying. I mean, there are 4 wafers being shown here. So the smallest one is 2-inch wafer, and the 4-inch wafer here, and then this is 6-inch, and this is 8 inches wafer. Okay. So this one is 2-inch. Now the wafer size, the maximum wafer size possible today is 12 inches. Okay, that is, it is 11.8 inch, but we generally refer to as 12-inch wafer. And the typical thickness of this wafer is 775 micrometer. Yeah, the slice that you obtained, so that is of 775 micrometer thickness, and which was obtained in 2002, and still it is being used till 2020. We have only 12-inch wafer, and the weight of this wafer is 125 grams. Okay. And the number of dies that can be produced, that is 10 mm by 10 mm dies, 640 dies of size 10 mm by 10 mm can be created. Yeah, so dies again means the same die, that is these rectangular blocks, these are called dies, and on these individual rectangular blocks, that is dies, you have your digital integrated circuits. Maybe a microprocessor can also be there on this single die, right? So 640 dies can be produced, and the size of those dies could be, if 10 mm by 10 mm, then 640 can be produced. Then in future you will also see, I mean it is not still there, but yes, in future you will see a 17.7 inch or maybe 26.6 inch wafers you will see in future, but still till this date they don't exist. Now we see that the cost per transistor, the complexity level is increasing, more components or more number of transistors are present on a chip now. So we see that the cost of per transistor, so that is continuously coming down. Yeah. So you see here that the cost of transistor, let's say in 1982 it was something, okay, and 2012 it has come down, 2020 it has further come down, right? So that is only possible because on the same wafer you are able to produce now more number of transistors. Okay, so that is how the cost per transistor, that is currently we see that it's coming down, and the cost per function is also coming down. Then whenever you fabricate digital ICs on these dies, so whenever you try to obtain dies from the wafer, so it is possible that some dies are good and some dies are defective. And also possible that some part of the wafer is not utilized, right? So for example, in this picture, you see that these parts portions, this die can only produce this wafer can only produce four, uh, you know, chips or four dies, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the rest of the area, that is this one, these are all waste. Yeah, these are unutilized. So obviously, unutilized area will, if you have more unutilized area, then this is a costly business, yeah, costly to the company. So we want to utilize more of this area. Now the die size will obviously depend. It depends upon the die size, how many dies you can produce. So for example, this wafer is also of the same size, but because the die size is smaller here, so more dies can be produced, right? So now we also come on to now this term which is called die yield. Okay. So die yield here means, just a second. So die yield here means number of good chips per wafer. I mean, it is given by number of good chips per wafer divided by total number of chips per wafer multiplied by 100%. Now, total number of chips, for example, these all gray regions, these are total number of chips produced. Now, among these total chips, also it is possible that some chips are good and some chips are defective. So, for example, in this picture here, the first picture, we see that 4 number of total chips can be produced. Yeah? Total number of chips are 4, but it is possible that 3 are okay and 1 is defective, or maybe 2 are okay and 1 is defective, right? So die yield we calculate by this term, that is this relation, that is number of good chips per wafer upon total number of chips per wafer. For example, in this, if total number of chips is 4 and 3 are good and 1 is bad, so that means die yield is 75%. Okay. If 2 are bad and 2 are good, so die yield is 50%. So similarly, we also have a relation to calculate the die cost, that is cost of each die. So this is given by total cost of the wafer divided by number of dies per wafer multiplied by die yield. Yeah, die yield we had calculated here. Number of dies per wafer we will know from here, and wafer cost also will be known. So we can calculate the total cost of one die. Then number of dies per wafer, how many dies per wafer? So obviously the dies per wafer, number of dies per wafer depends upon the size of the die. So we bring in this parameter, that is the die area, right? So this is given by this relation. This is pi, then wafer diameter by 2, or radius whole square, divided by die area minus pi times wafer diameter by square root of 2 times die area. Right. So by this relation, one can find out the total number of dies per wafer if you know the wafer diameter and die area. Yeah? Only two things are required, that is wafer diameter and die area. All right. Then, as I said, that some of the chips would be good and some may be having, some sort of defect. So, for example, here we see that the dies which have these red dots, okay, so these are defective dies. So obviously they will be unutilized. You cannot fabricate a digital integrated circuit on the defective or defected dies. Okay, so these red dots represent here. So all these red dots, the dies with red dots, so they represent the defective dies. So you cannot, for example, here only one good die can be produced. Yeah, others are defective. So similarly here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defective dies. So out of whatever number of dies are present here, yeah, number of dies are present here by the shaded region, square block shaded region. So die yield, if I bring in this defect per unit area number also, so then die yield can be modified. The formula for die yield can be modified, and it becomes, die yield becomes 1 plus defects per unit area multiplied by die area divided by this constant alpha. Okay? So if you know number of defects per unit area and die area, if these things are known, that is die yield is known, defects per unit area and die area is known, then alpha can be found out, and normally it is being found that alpha is approximately 3. So the value of alpha is approximately 3. So this alpha 3 can be found out. You can put in these numbers, that is maybe you can take a small wafer like this, okay, and then you can decide die yield based on the number of defects per unit area. I mean, 3 things you can decide and find out alpha. So alpha will always come around 3. Okay. So die cost, now that means depends upon this factor, that is die area. It is dependent on die area. In fact, it is a function of die area to the power 4. Die cost is the function of die area. Okay. Now we also understand if the gate is smaller, that is smaller is the gate, the higher will be the integration density and smaller will be the die size. This is very important to understand. In fact, we have discussed this so many times. So again, this is being coming, that is, if your gate is small, that is smaller is the gate, then higher could be the integration density. If the gate is not small, very big, the integration density obviously will be very small. So if the smaller is the gate, then higher will be the integration density and smaller will be the die size. The next point says smaller gates further tend to be faster. The gates are small, so obviously the parasitics associated with that gate will be small. So the gate can be faster and it will also consume less energy, as the total gate capacitance, which is one of the dominant performance parameters, often scales with area. So obviously the delay is, as I said previously, that if we take this simple RC delay, so this depends on 2 things, that is R and C, that is resistance and capacitance. Capacitance is by the simple this parallel plate model. If you take, the capacitance is given by this formula. Okay. So here we have area thing. So if you reduce the area, that is if you make devices which are small, so obviously capacitance can be brought down. Yeah? So if area goes down, then capacitance can also go down, right? So RC delay can be minimized, but the other thing you will notice is when you are reducing the size of your device, capacitance obviously goes down, but then resistance goes up. Yeah? Resistance can be given by, again, a simple formula, rho L by A. So A goes down, so obviously resistance also goes up, right? So one would say that capacitance is coming down, but resistance is also going up. So what happens to this RC delay? Okay. So the effect of resistance is not, the answer is that effect of resistance is not as much as the effect of capacitance, right? So capacitance has a larger effect on this RC delay. So that's why we say that makes devices small so that this capacitance can be brought down. So the delay can be brought down for the devices or components so that the gate can be faster. So for producing faster gates, or in fact smaller gates tend to be faster and they consume less energy, as the total gate capacitance, which is one of the dominant performance parameter, often scales with the area. So area scales, you scale the area, you make it high, C will also go up high, make it low, C will also come down. So RC delay can also be made variable. Now let us talk about there are some, I found some die yield calculators, so maybe I'll just give a quick look of it to you. So they can be accessed at these websites. I've added them in my presentation here slide. So maybe I'll show you. Let's open these websites. I'll open these websites for you and let us try to see what it is. Maybe yeah, so I'm sharing my screen with you. I think you can see my web browser.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We all see.
Okay. So this is a die number of dies per wafer calculator here, or die yield calculator. Okay. So you see here this wafer is there. Now you can change these parameters, that is die width and height. So obviously the total number of dies depend upon die width and height. So let us say we have 10 millimeter is the width and 10 millimeter is the this thing. So you see that number of dies that is produced, right? So 10 millimeter by 10 millimeter, we see that this picture has changed. Okay, so it says that the total wasted dies, okay, it's 0. Good dies is 40. The number of good dies is 40, and defective dies is number of defective dies is 4, and total yield is 90.56%. So similarly, you can change these numbers and play with this tool. Maybe let me make this further go up. Okay. Let's say that I increase this height. Okay, so I'm continuously increasing height. So number of chips per wafer is also changing, right? So I'm changing this height. Now you see that height is going up. I think there's a limit to this height, I think. So yeah, so W by L ratio or W by H ratio of this wafer is also fixed to some, I think, maximum. There is a maximum limit. You cannot go beyond that. So let us try to increase this W. So I increase W. So yield and good dies, so they are changing. Yeah? You can play with this tool. It's a useful tool here. So one can play with this. So many other things one can vary. Okay. So similarly, there is another tool. This was the previous one was from Kali Technologies, and the other one is from Silicon Edge from UK. So let me open that for you also again. The other one is called this one, right? So here also, this is already 10 mm by 10 mm. So here dies per wafer can be produced to 48, and the wafer diameter is 200 mm. So you can change the wafer diameter. If I make it 450, dies per wafer will also increase. Yes, currently die per wafer is 248 for 200 mm. So I make it 450 and recalculate. So obviously the dies per wafer have increased, okay, by 1416. Now let us bring this back to 200 mm. So this is 248. Now let us try to change the width of our die. Let's say it is 20 mm and this is also 20 mm, width and height, right? And recalculate. So the die per wafer becomes 56. Okay. All right. Yeah. Now in this die calculator, you also see here this scribe lane. Okay, the width and the width of the horizontal scribe lane and vertical scribe lane, right? So these scribe lanes are basically, if I say horizontal scribe lane, so these lines, yeah, these white lines, which you are seeing at the edges of these square blocks. So these are horizontal scribe lines, okay? And these are vertical scribe lines. Okay? So these vertical and horizontal scribe lines are, on this line actually you dice up. That is, you cut your dies on these lines. Okay? So for cutting also there are some sort of cutters, and for this dicing portion we utilize, I think, a circular cutter which has diamond edges. Now the width of that edge or width of this line around which it is cut, it is very small. It is 0.2 mm normally, right? So these are called scribe lines. So maybe let us go back to our presentation where what we were learning. So I'll go back to my slide.
Sir, in this calculator.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Sir, it calculates the number of defective dies. How it can calculate if we are making some die or something, a silicon wafer, then
so that is a prediction.
Generating it.
It is a prediction based on so many years the dies have been produced and so many wafers have been produced. So just a prediction, right?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So that you saw those calculators. So you may play with them, and it's interesting. Now here are a few numbers, okay, of the die sizes. So for example, these are the chips, and for these chips we have the die sizes mentioned here. Okay, so for these chips we have die sizes, die area is mentioned over here, then number of dies per wafer are also mentioned, yield is mentioned, and die cost is also mentioned. Okay. So from 386 to Pentium, okay, we see that metal layers, number of metal layers are also increasing, and the wafer cost we see also it's going up, okay, because wafer size is going up, and the area of the die, so that is also going up. Yeah? So from 43 to it's 296. Yeah? The area is going up because the complexity is increasing. So die size or die area is also going up. Then defects per centimeter square, that is also going up with complexity. Then you see here yield is coming down, right? Yield is going down because chips are bigger now, and the defects are also. I mean, yield depends upon few factors here. So yield depends on number of defects per centimeter square, okay, then number of dies per wafer. So these are the factors on which yield depends. So yield is coming down. We see that yield is going down with time because of number of defects per centimeter square, they are increasing, and the dies per wafer is reducing, right? And the cost of the die, so that also we see it's going up. The die cost, because die is becoming big, size of the die is going up here. Yeah, area in millimeter square, this is growing up. So that's why the cost is also going up, die cost. It is largely dependent on the area, right? So these two things, if you match. Right? So
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, dies per wafer sir is 40. So, what is the advantage of uses this chip?
Can you repeat, please?
Sir, in Pentium, dies per wafer is 40.
Okay.
So, what is the advantage of use this chip?
Advantage of using?
This chip.
Advantage is Pentium is more powerful. Pentium has more higher frequency, high speed. So that's why Pentium was brought in. So before that we had very low end processors, SuperSpark, DEC Alpha, PowerPC. So they were not matching the Pentium's performance. Its performance was high. So that's the benefit of using Pentium.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now you can also access the data sheet of one of the processors. Here I have given the link here. Okay. So here, so maybe if you find some time, you can open this. I have downloaded, but maybe there are many things you will find out this in this data sheet, and this is for Core i7 microprocessor. Okay. So you will find that this is in 32 nanometer, and many things are mentioned here. Whatever we will read in this course, and whatever we have read in this course. I mean, all these parameters which you are seeing on this screen, you will find, and apart from this, you will also find about heat sinks and many other information is provided. So if you find some time, you can open the data sheet and know what things are required for a microprocessor. Then let us talk about the other design matrix, which is reliability. Okay, so reliability cost we have talked about. Now let us talk about the other design matrix, which is reliability, and this reliability depends upon the noise in digital IC. Okay. So because noise can affect the signal levels, noise can make your circuit not work properly. So this reliability depends largely on how the circuit handles the noise. Okay. Now, for example, here, noise can be picked. There are 3 sources of noise which are being mentioned here, though there are many more. But let us talk about the this inductive coupling first. So by the mutual inductance, right? So for example, let us say that I have this wire number 1 and wire number 2. They are carrying signals. Okay, so wire number 2 is connected to this CMOS inverter, okay? And 1 is also carrying a signal, and they are very closely spaced. 1 and 2 are very closely spaced. The spacing is very small in between them. Now, because of this inductive coupling, that is, we have some mutual inductance between these two wires. So because of that, any signal change on this line, right? So this signal, some signal is changing on this line, let's say. Okay. So this signal change on this line can affect my signal on this line, right? Because I have some mutual inductance in between these two wires. So this is called inductive coupling or noise due to mutual inductance, right? So because of this noise, that is change on this line which is happening, so that can change the signal level on this line. So maybe let us say that my input was, let us say, to this inverter it was 5 volts. Okay. Now because of this noise, this noise which is happening on the, or the signal change which is happening on the neighboring line, so it is possible that it can affect this 5 volt signal, and this now becomes from 5 volts, it may become maybe 3.5 volts. So my input signal to this line, that is line number 2, that has become noisy now. So it has the levels are affected. That is, earlier it was 5 volt and now it is 3.5 volt. Okay. So similar thing can happen if my circuit has, or my wires have, mutual capacitance in between them. Right? So again, the same example is being taken where line number 1 and 2, they are closely spaced, and this time we have mutual capacitance existing in between these two lines. Okay. So now again, any change on this line, that is line number 1, will again affect the signal on this line. So same situation can happen here, that is, earlier it was 5 volts, so because of this noise which is happening on line number 1, signal on 2 can be affected, and it can again become 3.5 or maybe 4 volt or anything else, or maybe it can become, let's say, 4.9 volts. So these are the two sources, that is mutual inductance, that is inductive coupling, or the capacitive coupling. So two sources. Then the other source could be the noise picked from power and ground lines. Yeah, power and ground lines, they carry signals, and when any change on this these lines happen, that is, there may be some power and ground bounces which are happening on these lines. So because of these changes, again, that can affect any part of your circuit. Maybe the input or output lines can be affected. So your circuit can pick noise from power and ground lines as well. Now, how to ensure that these noises, that is inductive coupling or maybe capacitive coupling or power and ground noise, so how to ensure that these do not affect the final operation of my circuit, right? Because normally the reliability depends upon how well the circuit can perform in presence of noise. If it cannot perform in presence of noise, that means that circuit is not reliable. Okay? So how to ensure that my circuit, that is digital IC, can perform even in presence of noise? Okay? So for that, the noise margin of my digital IC should be very high. So in fact, before learning about this noise margin, let us first talk about this CMOS inverter. We'll get a small briefing of CMOS inverter, because this VTC, that is voltage transfer characteristic, that we are going to talk about now for calculating the noise margins, that depends upon our knowledge on. Yes, please.
Sir, the noise you were talking in the previous slide was due to crosstalk.
Yeah, so this is actually crosstalk, an example of crosstalk, inductive coupling and capacitive coupling. Okay. So obviously these are the examples of crosstalk. Right.
So then we can eliminate it by providing a ground between the.
Right, correct. To some extent, you can eliminate by providing a ground shield. Okay, that is a separate line with grounded connection. So one of the methods are this, by which you can prevent this to some extent. But still, how to ensure that if the noise sources are existing, how to ensure that the circuit will work properly? So for that, we say that our circuit should have high noise margin. So we'll try to find out the noise margin from the DC characteristics or voltage transfer characteristics. So, but before that, before understanding this VTC and noise margin, we'll have to understand the working of CMOS inverter. So maybe I'll try to brief this working of CMOS inverter. So do we have any class after this? Do you have any class after this class?
After this class, right now we don't have any.
Okay,
It will be starting from 1:47.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll take 10 more minutes from my scheduled lecture. So maybe 10 more minutes I'll exceed. So let us talk about this CMOS inverter thing, because before that we cannot think of going into this noise margin thing. Okay. So let me talk about this CMOS inverter first. So we understand this CMOS inverter. CMOS means complementary metal oxide semiconductor technology. So complementary means here both outputs, that is, if I am trying to produce a NAND gate or AND gate, so NAND is also possible, right? So AND, that is complement of NAND, is also possible. So for a CMOS inverter, you need two MOSFET, that is, one is PMOS and one is NMOS. So you connect the gates of both PMOS and NMOS together, and you apply here VDD, and then here maybe it is visible, I think, and this is my ground.
Yes, sir.
This is my V out. Let us say this is my V out. Okay, and this is, let us say, the input port V in. Right. Right. So this is my CMOS inverter. And let us also identify the source and drains for this. So this is source of the PMOS, and this is drain of PMOS. This one is the drain of NMOS, and this is the source of the NMOS. Okay. And these are the gates of both the MOSFET. I'll write simply G here, gates of these two MOSFET. Now let us digest that this CMOS inverter behaves in a manner that if you apply a 0 here, DC operation, let us apply a 0 here, so it will invert. So whatever you apply at the input, output will be inverted. So if I apply a 0 here, so at the output you will get a 1. So that is actually inverting. Yeah? So inverting the input to get the output. So output is always the invert or inversion of the input. So if I apply a 0 here, so you get a 1 here, and if you apply a 1 here, the output will be 0 here. Let us digest this at this moment. Yeah? For digital integrated circuit, the CMOS inverter, you apply a 0, so you get a 1 at the output. You apply a 1, you get a 0 at the output. Now 0 is considered as, let us say, 0 is, let us define, 0 is low level. Okay, low level input is called 0, let us say, or maybe say that 0 is ground. Yeah, so we'll refer this to ground or low input level. Okay. Then similarly, we'll say 1 means high input level. Okay, high input level, or let us say VDD in this case. So ground is obviously 0, and VDD normally, let us say that we are taking VDD as 5 volts. The ground is 0, and VDD, let us say we take 5 volts. Okay. So now, why this? Another question will come into our mind, that how this operates, okay, and why it is giving 1 if I apply a 0 here at the input. So why it is giving 1, right? So let us try to answer this also. So before that, let us try to understand the function of this CMOS inverter. So if I say 0 and PMOS also, yeah, one more thing important, that is PMOS are on. So PMOS is on, okay, when input is 0. So this is on when input is 0. Input given to it is 0. Okay. Otherwise it is off. And similarly, the NMOS is on. Maybe let me write here. NMOS is on. NMOS is on when input is 1 or high, right? So PMOS is always on when you give input, that is at the gate. Input you always provide at the gate. So when input is 0, PMOS is considered on, and when input is 1 for NMOS at the gate, so NMOS is on, right? So in this example, when I apply an input 0, so that means PMOS will be on, NMOS will be off, right? So when PMOS is on, what it will do is it will try to charge this output node to VDD, right? So I have a 0 input here, so NMOS is on, this is cut, okay? And at the output node I have a, let me erase this. So at the output node I also have, output node is always associated with a capacitor. So I have some capacitance at the output node or load capacitance, and this load capacitance comes from the drain diffusion capacitance of these MOSFETs. That is the drain diffusion capacitance of PMOS and drain diffusion capacitance of NMOS. So they contribute to this load capacitance. Okay? So whenever my input is 0, PMOS is on, so PMOS will try to charge this load capacitance, okay? Because NMOS is on. Now when you make your input 1, so for input 1, my NMOS is on, PMOS is off, right? So VDD supply is cut. So input is 1, NMOS is on. So whatever is stored on this load capacitance, so that will be discharged, okay, via this path, okay, through this NMOS. And this node, that is V out, will be brought down to 0. That is, the capacitance will lose its charge. When input is 1, NMOS is on, capacitance will lose its charge via this NMOS to ground. So the output node will become 0. Okay, so that is why we say that when input is 0, the output is high, because this node will be charged to VDD. And when input is 1, PMOS is off, NMOS is on, so output V out will be brought down to 0. That is, this capacitance will be discharged to ground. Okay, this is simple operation of my CMOS inverter, right? Now somebody will say that why my PMOS is on applying 0 and why my NMOS is on when I apply 1, right? So let us talk about the necessary conditions for my PMOS or NMOS to be on, right? So for my NMOS to be on, I have this condition. NMOS to be on, I have this condition, that is my VGS, that is the voltage applied between gate and source, should be greater than or equal to the threshold voltage of the MOSFET. Okay? So threshold voltage of the MOSFET, let us say for NMOS, it is 0.4 volts. So that means one has to apply more than 0.4 volt between the gate and source of the NMOS. Okay? VGSN, let us say, and VTHN. Okay? So for NMOS to be on, the necessary condition is that VGS, that is voltage applied or bias applied across gate to source, should be greater than the threshold voltage of the MOSFET. Now threshold voltage is similar to that built-in potential or threshold voltage of a diode, right, which was 0.7 volt for PN junction diode, you might be knowing. So for NMOS, let us say it is 0.4 volts, okay, plus 0.4 volts. Similarly for PMOS, we say PMOS is on only when my VSG, here that is voltage applied between source and gate, so that is greater than equal to mod of the threshold voltage of PMOS. Okay. So mod of threshold voltage, because the threshold voltage of MOSFET is PMOS is negative. Okay, so let us say it is minus 0.4 volts. Right. So these are two necessary conditions for my PMOS and NMOS to be on, and in other situation it is off. Okay. So if the bias across the just a second, I think somebody is trying to log in. Yeah. Yeah, so two necessary conditions we saw. That is my PMOS is on when you have VSG, so that is greater than equal to mod of VTP, right? So these things we have to check here, and my NMOS is on when my VGS, right? So that is greater than or equal to, again, the threshold voltage, okay? Threshold voltage of my NMOS, right? Which is here minus 0.4 volt threshold voltage, and this is plus 0.4 threshold voltage. Okay? So when you apply a 0 here, okay, or maybe let us so when you apply a 0 at the gate of PMOS, right, and this is source, okay, this is drain.
Sir, presentation is not visible.
Just a second. Again, I'll have to. Just a second. Okay, is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So let us go to the same this thing. Let me draw this once again, CMOS inverter, and let us apply a 0 at the gate of the PMOS. So these are source, drain. This is important to remember. This is gate. Okay, let us apply a 0 at the gate of my CMOS. Let us say PMOS inverter. This is 0, and this is VDD. Let us say 5 volts. Okay, VDD. So necessary condition for PMOS to be on is PMOS is on when VSG. So VSG, that should be greater than equal to mod of VTP, and VTP is minus 0.4 volt. Let us say VTP is this threshold voltage of this thing is PMOS is minus 0.4 volt. Let us say. So in this case, let us try to find out VSG. Okay, so VDD is 5 and this is 0. So VSG, so that is 5 volts. Okay, so VSG is, so if I try to find out this relation, so this is 5 volts and this is greater than this 0.4 volts, right? For a PMOS, when I apply a 0 here, so VSG is 5 minus 0, that is 5 volts, and that is greater than equal to mod of this VTP threshold volt, that is 0.4 volt. So it is on, right? Now let us say I apply 1 volt. Let us say I apply 1 volt here, or maybe 2 volts. So on 2 volts, what happens? This becomes 3 volt. So this is still greater than 0.4 volt. It is on, right? Now, yeah, it's still on 2 volts. Okay. Now 4 volts, or maybe let us say 4.6 volts, or maybe 4.7 volts. 4.7 volts. Oh, sorry, 4.7 we apply. Let us say 4.7 we apply here. Okay. So VSG is how much? So VSG is how much?
0.3.
That is 5 minus 4.7. So that is equal to 0.3 volts. So 0.43 volt, is it greater than 0.4 volts? So it is not greater. So that means this condition is not satisfied. Okay. So that means my MOSFET will switch off in this case. Right? Similarly for NMOS. Okay. So that's why we say when we apply a 0, NMOS is on, and it is on up to 4.6 volt. 0 to 4.6 volts. From this, we can see that from 0 to 4.6 volt, the MOSFET is on. That is, PMOS is on. Okay. So PMOS is on from 0 to 4.6 volts, because this condition is satisfied. But at 4.7 volt, okay, so at 4.7 volt input, this condition is not satisfied. So PMOS becomes off. In this scenario, this PMOS becomes off at 4.7 volts. Otherwise, PMOS is on. So that is why we say that at 0, the PMOS is on. Yeah, PMOS is on when you apply input at input 0. Yeah, PMOS is on. So we say that PMOS is on when you apply input is equal to 0, in is equal to 0 volts, or when you apply a low level. Yeah. So digital logic, we have only two logic levels, 0 or 1. So you apply 0, we say that PMOS is on. Similarly, you verify NMOS. So for NMOS to be on, we have this condition, that is VGS should be greater than equal to VT of NMOS. Okay. So let us try to apply for NMOS, let us try to apply 5 volts. Okay. Let us say we apply 5 volt input. Okay. For 5 volts. For 5 volt input, let us verify this condition, VGS. Okay. So 5 volt. That means you apply here 5 input. At this point, input you apply 5 volts. Okay. And let us say, let us say 5 volt we apply. So VGS is how much? In this relation, let us verify. Try to verify this relation. So for 5 volt, how much is VGS? That is V gate to source. Source is already grounded. Yeah? Gate to source. Source is grounded. So how much is VGS? That is difference between G and S is how much? 5 minus 0.
0.
So this is 5 volts, right? So this condition is now, this relation is 5 volts, which is greater than 0.4 volts. Right? VTN, that is threshold voltage of NMOS, is plus 0.4 volts. Okay. So we see that in this condition it will be on. Now you apply 4 volts. Again it is on. So that means up to 0.4 volts it will be on. And if I apply 0.3, so again VGS is 0.3, that means so it still will not be on. Right? So this is less than 0.4. In this case it is off. Similarly, if you apply 0, from 0 also it will be off, right? So apply 0, it is off. So that is why we say that my PMOS is on when my NMOS is on when I apply VDD of 1. It is high. Input is high, NMOS is on. Input is low, NMOS is off. Okay. So whenever you apply a 0 here, one of these MOSFETs will be on always. In any digital integrated circuit, you will find either this pull-up network will work. This is called pull-up network, which is made of PMOS, and this is called pull-down network, which is made from NMOS. So in complementary logic style, that is CMOS, any one of these will be on. Okay. So you apply on the inputs, on the combination of inputs, only one of these pairs will be on. Either pull-up network will be on or pull-down network will be on. That is, either charging of the output node to the full VDVD will happen, or the discharging of this node, that is output node, will happen. Okay. So if pull-up network is on, that is PMOS is on, the charging of this CL will happen. Okay. If my pull-down network is on and pull-up network is off, so the discharging of this capacitor will happen. Right. So always in any digital circuit, not just CMOS inverter, any digital circuit, okay, a CMOS digital circuit, either one pull-up network will be on or pull-down network will be on a particular combination of input. So in this case, when you apply a 0, so pull-up network is on, that is my PMOS is on. Okay. When you apply a 1, my pull-down network, that is NMOS is on, okay, PMOS is off. So why it is called pull-up network? So pull-up means it will, this network that is which is made from PMOS, this will pull this output node up to VDD. Okay. Right. So this is why it is called pull-up network, because when this pull-up network is on, it will pull up this output node to VDD. So that is why it is called pull-up network. Why this is called pull-down network? Because when this pull-down network will be on, it will pull down this node to ground or 0 volt, right? So that is why this is called pull-down network, and this is valid for any digital circuit, not just this CMOS inverter. Okay. So maybe I think I'll stop here, and then the next lecture we can discuss about the calculation of noise margin and all. So we'll talk about how to calculate the noise margin. Okay. So if you have any queries, then maybe I can take up. Otherwise, the class is ended. We are already running late now. I think exceeded the class hours. Yeah. So if you have any query, then please ask. Otherwise, let us end the class.
Sir, what happens if the input voltage is between 0.2 to 4.6, sir? 0.4 to 4.6.
Input voltage is 0.2, let us say first. For NMOS or for PMOS?
For both, sir, it has to be 0 or 5, sir. But what happens if the voltage is in between 0.4 to 4.6, sir? Then both will become on, no, sir.
Okay, let us see. Let us take your problem here. Okay. Okay, for let us say NMOS first, the input is 0.2 to
0.4 to 4.6.
Oh, 0.4
in between any value.
0.4 to
4.6.
4.6. This is my gate, this is my source, so VGS should be greater than VT. So VGS should be greater than VT, so that means it will be on.
Yes, sir.
Always on. Not up to 4.6, but for 5 volt also it will be on.
Okay, sir.
0.4 to 5 volts it will be on. And for PMOS, right? Now let us talk about PMOS. So for PMOS, I have a gate over here and source here, which is already connected to VDD. Right, so VSG. So for 0.4 volt, VSG is 5 minus 0.4. That is 4.6. So it is on.
Yes, sir.
0.4 volt it is on. And for 4.6 volt, this will be 5 minus 0.46. Still on.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is on in both the cases.
Then what will be the output, sir?
Yeah, so output will be, I mean, for that we'll have to understand now the voltage transfer characteristics. So both the MOSFETs are on. So output is, what we call as, it is in an undefined region.
Metastable state.
Metastable or undefined region. In fact, there is some output, but that output is, I mean, that region of operation is not desirable. Okay. So there will be some, in fact, I mean, both the MOSFETs are on. So obviously PMOS will try to charge, okay, because it is on. and NMOS will try to discharge this node.
Yes, sir.
Both the MOSFETs are on, so obviously that means PMOS will try to charge and NMOS will try to discharge.
Discharge.
Now it depends upon the level of the input required to either make this on or towards the off region, right? So for example, if it is NMOS, you apply more gate bias voltage. Yeah. So NMOS, for example. So NMOS, if we talk about, if it is,
What is the condition?
yeah, let
Both
me complete first.
CMOS
So
and
for
MOS.
NMOS, for NMOS, if I apply 5 volts, so that means this is in strong on position,
Yes, sir.
fully on. Okay. Now for 0.4 volt, it is on but weakly. Yeah, it is weak on, not fully on but weak on, not as much strong. So the current drive will be different. That is, the current which can be flowing through NMOS on 5 volts and for 0.4 volt, that will be different. Right? So obviously current will be more here. So this node can be discharged quickly if the bias is 5 volt compared to the bias when the bias is 0.4 volts, because it is weakly on 0.4 volts. Right? It is very strongly on when it is 5 volt. Okay. Now if input is, if PMOS is strongly on, right? That's PMOS, the region where PMOS is on, let's say PMOS is strong on and NMOS is weak on. So obviously this node will be charged more than it will be discharged. Okay. So these things we have to locate. In fact, when we talk about this VTC, we'll talk about these issues. So these two MOSFETs are on. So obviously the logic levels, that is 0 and 1, cannot be achieved. So unless one of these turns off, you cannot achieve full 0 and full 1.
Yes, sir.
Right? So that is why we see that VTC looks somewhat like this, right? So here I have, for example, input, and here I have output, and I want that at 0, that is complete 0. The output should be 0, but output is actually not 0. Sorry, not high, completely high. Yeah, let us say this is VDD. VDD lies here, so final output is not high. On input 0, the final output is not completely VDD because of this situation, that is one of these MOSFETs are on. Right? So, but yes, if you have idle MOSFETs, so then you can think about ideal VTC where on 0 you will get full VDD and you will get full 0 here. When it is, for VDD, I think here you will get full 0. So that depends upon the MOSFETs. If they are ideal, that is VTC is ideal, you can say that, okay, one of them will be always on. But, the reality is not so. We do not have ideal devices, so ideal VTC is not possible. So obviously one of them will always be on. Okay. So this low and high voltage levels, that is full swings, will not be obtained at the output. Output will not be either full 0 or full 1, that is full ground and full VDD. Because of this problem, that is, you are operating in this 0.4 to 0.46 range where both the MOSFETs are on, right? Anything else?
Sir, how to overcome these situations, sir?
Yeah,
If
so to overcome this situation, you need to ensure that, VTC, that is the VTC of your MOSFET, the circuit, so that should be somewhat like this, the ideal. Yeah, but this is very hard to obtain. Okay. So that means there is some sort of noise in the in picture, right? So this condition happens. So normally in digital IC designs, we try to apply full 0 and full 1. Whenever we apply input, we don't apply in this range, 0.4 to 0.6. Either we apply full 0 or full 1. Okay. But because of noises in the system, it is possible that the input lies in this range finally, 0.4 to 0.46 for 4.6. Instead of full 0 and 1, because of noise in the system, it is possible that the input levels are now 0.4 to 0.6. So how to overcome this situation should be the question, right? Instead of worrying about if I'm applying 0.4 or 4.6. We never apply inputs in this range. We always apply either a complete 0 or complete 1 in digital ICs. But because of noise, the input will lie in this situation. So to overcome this situation, we say my noise margin should be very high. So for high noise margin, again, there are some techniques. We say that there should be gain should be infinite, and then you should have two regions of this kind where the gain is -1. Okay. So we will talk about these things later on when we come on to this noise margin issue. Yeah, anything else?
Thank you, sir.
Sir,
Yeah, please.
so in this case, since the VDD is connecting up to the ground, the current.
Can you please loud up little bit because I can't hear your voice.
Sir, am I audible now?
Yeah, but please speak little bit more loud.
Sir, in the case you explained now, is the power dissipating since the current flowing from the VDD to the ground?
Always, whenever there is both the MOSFETs are on, so that means you have a direct connection between VDD and ground. So obviously power dissipation will be there.
Sir,
Right?
the reason we are using CMOS is that there is no need to use the.
Yeah, definitely. So correct. So we are using CMOS because we say that power dissipation is minimum, and you do not have a connection between VDD and ground. Right. So that is why we avoid this region. Can you see my screen here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we avoid this region. That is that 0.4 to 4.6. So always we apply 0 and 1, full 0 or full 1 to avoid this thing, because we don't want both the MOSFETs to be on at the same time, because in this region both the MOSFETs are on. So if both are on, there is a possibility, I mean there are chances that the VDD and ground are always connected. So VDD and ground, you have a direct connection, so obviously that means ground is dissipating power from VDD. Yeah.
Okay,
Power dissipation via these two on MOSFETs is going on because both VDD and ground have a connection because both the MOSFETs are on. Okay.
Okay.
And we don't want this situation to happen in our CMOS circuits. And this happens only at one stage when switching is happening. Whenever you have a switching event happening, so for a very short instant, this happens in CMOS. Okay, so that is called actually dynamic power dissipation, which is happening because of switching events. So static means there is no power dissipation going on because only one MOSFET is on at a time. So I don't have a direct connection between VDD and ground. But for dynamic power dissipation, that is which happens because of switching event, for a moment or for a very short instant, both the MOSFETs are on and we have a connection between VDD and ground for that very short moment. So that results into dynamic power dissipation. Yeah, it is unwanted, and CMOS is capable of avoiding power dissipation to a very large extent. Consider to only the CMOS inverter, the inverter can be also made by just using one NMOS and a resistor. Okay? And the same inverter can be made by using two MOSFET, PMOS and NMOS. Right? So we have an advantage of using two transistors, that is PMOS and NMOS, that is CMOS style, that is you don't have a direct connection between VDD and ground always. But for the other style, that is when you have a resistor and NMOS connected, okay, and you try to make an inverter. So in that case, you always have a direct connection between VDD and ground. So I'll talk about these things maybe in next class.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, any other questions, please?
Sir, will there be class tomorrow?
Yes, there will be. Always there will be class. So whenever
October 2nd, sir.
Gandhi
Don't know confirmation regarding holidays.
So is it a holiday tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
national holiday.
Oh,
don't
national
know.
holiday. Yeah, then
Gandhi Jayanti.
we'll have no class then. So if there is a
2nd October,
holiday, yeah, 2nd October is also an institute holiday. It is in our institute calendar. So there will be no class. So national holidays and the holidays which fall in our institute calendar, we don't have any class.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.